Hello and welcome to From the Be-All End. This is the preview for the game Burnley versus Cardiff City. I'm Simon Evans, and with me is Chris Boden, Paul Woodhouse, and the guest today is Andy Jones from The Athletic. Glad to have Andy with us. How are you doing, Andy?
Good, thank you. Glad to be on again.
Good. Great to have you. Well, before we get into sort of looking at Cardiff, let's just reflect a little bit more on that Luton game, because it's not often we get to talk about a 4-1 win. So I think a bit of double dipping is justified in this case. I mean, Woody, you were saying on the last pod that it sort of creates the perfect atmosphere, really, for Scott Parker's first game in charge at Turf Moor.
It certainly does, doesn't it, really? I mean, any kind of little niggling doubt, certain people thinking, oh no, Scotty Parker is a little bit dull, is not exactly what we're thinking we were wanting in the Championship. And all of a sudden, a lot of that kind of negativity's been dispelled, hasn't it? And I mean, granted, one result doesn't make a season, but it's definitely an exceptional way to set your stall out, isn't it? And I can imagine, all of a sudden, everybody's extremely happy. You saw the reaction of the fans and the players to the fans after the game at Luton. You know that that's going to carry on to the home game. So no drums required.
No drums required. Yeah. Chris, I mean, looking at, the way the season ended and with Company walking out, there was a bit of a sort of downer around Turf Moor as there was bound to be after a relegation. Then the manager walking out. A lot of people wondering what kind of team we'll have, what kind of manager we have. But we've got this big squad still pretty much in place, and a new manager who's come in and a 4-1 win under the belt. There should be a positive atmosphere around Turf Moor, shouldn't there?
Well, so the fans were absolutely bang up for what on paper looked a horrendous opening game. You've got to travel down to Luton on a Monday night. Probably a lot of fans would have taken a point before kick-off, probably. Without having a proper look at Luton from the back end of last season, but it's just restored the feel-good factor, hasn't it? In one fell swoop, like to see. I say James Trafford joining in the celebrations and jumping on people and with a smile on his face that we didn't see an awful lot last year. Wout Weghorst, imploring Scott Parker to go over to the away end and clap them, and he seemed to be. I think you can see him mouth. I'm new. I don't know I don't know what to do, sort of thing. But it's a lot. For whichever player you listen to in the interviews, whether it's Esteve today or O'Shea after the game, Cullen that I've heard speak, everyone, Josh Brownhill, they're all speaking like the group's very, very tight, very together, and. It must be. It's a kick in the teeth, no matter where you look. Even though it was coming a long way down the track, getting relegated out of the Premier League and not being in the big time anymore is a kick in the teeth. And to sort of pick up the ball again and start running, absolutely fantastic to see. And I'm sure there'll be a raucous welcome on Saturday.
Andy, we were expecting quite a lot of coming and goings from Turf Moor this summer. Obviously, the window isn't anywhere near really being closed yet, and we certainly will expect some to go out because the squad is massive by Championship standards. But were you a bit surprised at the way Parker's rehabilitated certain players? I mean, everyone says that you start with a blank sheet of paper under a new manager, but it was still, for me, a surprise to see Roberts in the starting lineup. A surprise to see Weghorst come off the bench. Does it feel like he's just said to everybody, I want to have a look at you all, I want to treat you all the same? Or
I think so. I think one of the things that really drew Burnley to Parker in just sort of during the process was his ability to manage. Now it's not, when things haven't been going well necessarily at other clubs, it's not always been the greatest, but I think what he is able to do is when he comes into a club, he makes a really good impression on everyone, and that was that element of that clean slate. And for a player like Roberts, I think it was, let's see who the new manager is, let's see am I in his plans, and then take it from there. And I think Parker's given everybody an opportunity to sort of show themselves and impress him. And you can see from the fact that Roberts was in there, and Weghorst was probably the biggest surprise of all. Just to even see him on the bench was one of those sort of double takes, and because you just think he's just never going to play for Burnley again, and there he is coming on as a sub. So I think it has been that sort of mentality. Parker's, he's enjoyed getting to know the players and sort of learning about them, and I think for a lot of them, it's shackles off. I think there was a lot of frustrated figures after last season, whether that was because they were out on loan, or they're coming back in trying to prove a point, or been pushed to the fringes by company and sort of especially some of the Championship players or the Championship winners, and the Zaroris and Bensons. So I think there's just that new freshness, and I think everyone needed to go away for a few weeks and get away from the training ground and everything that was going on. And I think there's just that renewed energy, and Parker's been key to driving that. And I was told at sort of the start of the summer that there wouldn't be massive amounts of incomings, but I think that was obvious because of the size of the squad. You literally can't really do much more. Otherwise, you're going to have to be getting rid of 10, 15 players. But I think you suspect there's going to be a fair bit of movement still in terms of outgoings, especially in the last couple of weeks, because Burnley have got to hit a squad size, and at the moment the squad is too big for that, and there's no point having players who aren't selected in that squad, hanging around. So whether it's Sales, obviously Berg, you still expect him to leave. There's obviously the Dara O'Shea links to Brentford, which I was told wasn't necessarily as close as had been reported, but there's still that interest there, so that that could escalate, and you never know with James Trafford and what might happen. But the fact that he starts suggests that maybe there's been a bit of a thought process of is it best for everyone's for him to have a year in the Championship, and then you look at some more of the people who are probably on the fringes now, and you think maybe you're going to have to look at some loans, because what is their market, what is their value? It's difficult to sort of see, and therefore is it best for them to try and have a loan for a year and hopefully build that value so that you can make a bit more money on them next summer.
Yeah, I mean, there's some players there who you really do, even in the Championship, look at and wonder, where they're going to find a space in the team. Obviously, if we start selling people like O'Shea and Berger, that opens up a little bit of space for other people. But there's some players like these. You could say Delcroix, for example, who came in, Woody, and he was like pretty much thrown into the scene straight away in the Premier League, playing at centre half and at left back, and then now it looks like well down the pecking order in the Championship. I mean, it's going to be quite a tricky job for Parker, isn't it, to decide who does go out, because he's had limited time to see them, really, hasn't he? And then he's going to be making decisions that affect the whole season.
Exactly, like he was saying on his presser this morning. It's 4 weeks that he's had to have a look, and they're asking, have you had time to look at everybody individually? And he said probably not as much as he'd want to. It was more a case of trying to get the group and then looking at everybody individually. So to that point, it could be, with Delcroix and his extended honeymoons, etc. It could take quite a bit of time with the talent that we've got at the back, all told, for him to get a reasonable looking. So you could probably see him either being moved on or out on loan or whatever. But I think just looking at this squad, there's only 5 players over the age of 30. So you can see with that in mind that maybe having a word with Mr. Weghorst and saying, look, you can be, a senior player who has been there, who's seen it, who's seen some pressure at the highest level, could be quite a benefit to this squad overall, especially some of the younger lads.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, if you're in Scott Parker's shoe and you come into the club and you've got all this long list of players and the contracts, and then you're basically asking yourself the question, do I want to keep this Dutch international centre forward who played for Manchester United the season before last? Do I want to keep this right back who Leeds United had last season, but who played pretty reasonably in the Premier League for Burnley? Do I want to keep, these players who are on the fringes of their national teams? There's a lot of options there that he has, but it must be a really tricky job for him now to sort of cut it down to whatever a reasonable size is. I don't know, 22, 23.
Yeah, I see. Unless you get the hard word from above that says we have to get shut of X, Y, Z because of wages, players digging their heels in, wanting out, etc. But like you say, if he's got these like ridiculous options. So, you would want to sort of try and integrate Weghorst, etc. But I mean, you think for Weghorst, if there's serious interest from back home, and if Ajax come calling, and again, you don't say
he's on his way,
say no to Ajax if you're a Dutch international, etc. But if that doesn't sort of transpire, then it could have a hell of a lot of fun this season in a team that's going to be on the front foot trying to win games every week. And, like we were saying last week, if they don't finish in the top two, it's got to be deemed a failure with the options available. But you'd be saying to him, go and fill your boots, Wout. And it's not a tournament year for the Netherlands. So, even if he could have a season with Burnley, win promoted, and then go on a free or do whatever he wants, it's... so he's still got another year to sort of, earn Koeman's trust, etc. And if he goes up, having scored 25, 30 goals in a championship promotion season, it does him no harm whatsoever, I'd have thought, But, I say Roberts is an asset. He's got, Sambo that we haven't seen yet that, has good pedigree. It's just an embarrassment of riches that the phrase that we keep using and trying to whittle that down. Like I said that Charlie Taylor was he was overlooked. We played Vitinho at left back. We played Al Dakil played there. Then he brings in Delcourt straight into the team. But it's all right because Vincent had a chat with Charlie and they were all right about it. And it was a miracle you got the performances you got out of Charlie Taylor. What a good professional to have that, and then if basically anyone will do, they'd have put the kit man in ahead of Charlie Taylor at one stage early last season, and he kept his professionalism and performed even though he knew he wasn't wanted. So it sounds like Parker in that respect. He's showing everyone a lot of love. And, they say Amdouni, look at the reception Amdouni got in, on tour the other week. He's got another week's training under his belt. And that's frightening, isn't it, the options they have?
Yeah, at this championship level. And you wonder, though, if there is going to be some pressure coming from above because, the finances are the picture. It's fairly clear that the club has big debts, and can they afford to be an ownership group that allows an asset like Mike Trésor, who cost them a lot of money? I don't know how they're going to get that money back, but you would think the best chance of getting it back would be to sell him quickly, because if he doesn't do it in the Championship, unless they take that gamble that we're going to put him in the side and if he does well in the Championship, we might be able to sell him on. I don't know. I mean, Andy, is there some pressure from above, do you think, to move on some players who can bring in money and pay for everything else?
I think, well, at the start of the summer, it was sort of indicated to me that they thought 3 or 4 of the sort of first team players, and when I say first team, as in the players who were playing regularly in the starting 11, not just sort of the first team squad, will probably move on. I think whether they thought they were going to get the amount of money they did for Muric, because that was a really good fee, I thought, for a keeper who, while showed he was certainly Premier League quality, also showed that he's got a big mistake in him. But also the fee they got for Vincent Kompany was really good, which really helped. It was effectively like selling a player.
How much was Muric again? Remind me.
Was it something around sort of 10 rising to 15 or something like that. So it was
Company was about 8, was it?
Company was 10, an initial 10. So
right.
Based on performance, I think whatever he wins, I think it could go up to about 15, maybe something like that. So it's.
Are we supposed to root for Bayern Munich in the Champions League this year?
Yes, effectively. So I think when you look at those two fees, it's that's a massive help. But I still think, and you don't know, the transfer window gets very crazy at this time. You don't know what bids are going to fly in. I think Burnley have made it pretty clear that they want more than £20 million for Sander Berg, for example. You wonder if whether that's a negotiation tactic, but I think they've generally been pretty relaxed about selling because I think they expect the offers to come and they're happy to sort of dig their heels in a little bit and wait for it. They don't want to be seen to be selling for cheap, and I think they've been pretty happy to wait for people to match their valuations rather than sort of try and meet in the middle or come down to what other clubs value players at. So I think that there's no secret that Burnley need to sell players, and you don't know what offers are going to come along. If someone decides a couple of days before the window ends to come in for Odegaard for a healthy price, that it's difficult for Burnley to turn it down. I think because if you hit a number, Burnley have got to sell basically. That's just the way business works. That's how every football club who isn't in the top 6 operates. There will be a price for every single player in that squad, some higher, some lower. So I think the expectation is, I think that a couple more will you would leave and there'll be decent price tags coming in. Whether they hit the 70 million that they brought in, 2 seasons ago when they sold McNeil and Collins and Cornet. Whether it gets up there, I'm not quite sure. But they also haven't had the outlay of the signings this summer. It's a lot of little, small, not many players coming in. Certainly nowhere near the 16. But also, for minimal fees and there's not been a massive player income and a lot of buys. So that also balances that in a sense. And I think if you are confident and you've always got to plan for the worst case scenario, but let's be frank, Burnley should be in the Premier League next season with the squad that they've got. So is there a bit of room for, can you call it a gamble, but is there a bit of room for, if we keep hold of someone instead of selling them, that next summer they'll be in the Premier League and they'll have the money back that they'll lose in terms of revenues and stuff. So there's all those things, but also Burnley at the end of the day don't want to make it obvious that we're auctioning all these players off, so come and lowball. That's the other side. They've got to stick to the guns for as long as they can.
It's a funny market. I can't quite work it out, because I was thinking, Woody, like when looking at some of the lack of sort of big activity from the big clubs and so on, you expected some clubs like Liverpool to go out and spend a load of money this summer, which they haven't really done, and other clubs as well. And then suddenly Spurs spend 60 million on Solanke. And you think, oh, it's a crazy market again, But I don't know. What do you make of the market at the moment overall?
See, there are one or two that stick out. I mean, obviously, United have gone a little bit bonkers again, haven't they? But like the likes of Archie Gray and Rutter, he's gone for 40 million, hasn't he? So there seems to be some like younger players who have gone for big money, young and unproven of
the Cole Palmer effect.
Yes, exactly. The 30 to 40. Whereas what you'd expect is really big transfers. Maybe that will come these next couple of weeks. But they seem to have been a little bit cagey. I kind of like the way that Burnley has said, well, if you want them, you're going to have to pay top dollar. We don't seem to be making noises along the lines of you can have him for what you want. You'll pay this amount and fair play. Can't really complain at that.
Chris, if you were a Premier League club looking at Burnley's squad, and Sander Berge is the one that everyone always says, but is there anyone else in that squad if you were a Premier League club? Because we can see a number of players going somewhere in Europe. That's not an issue. But to the Premier League's a different question. That's where the big money fees come in. Who else on that squad, if you were a Premier League manager, would you be looking at and thinking, I'd snap him up from Burnley for 15?
I'll say Andy mentioned Odebear. I mean, there's been sort of the Ipswich were linked with Odebear. I mean, they've spent a few quid already at Ipswich, and whether they could sort of, whether they've enough spare to convince Burnley to part ways with him. I mean, if he came in for whatever it was, roughly 10 million quid or so, he's enhanced his reputation. He's gone and, he's not sulking at getting relegated. He's put a shift in on Monday night, and you'd be wanting, I don't know, 15, 20 million quid for him at least, wouldn't you? I'd have thought. I say O'Shea's another who's, despite, the misery of last season's 38 games and only 5 wins. O'Shea, another, a good age, international, scored a few goals, chipped in again on Monday night. If you're looking for a relatively cut price centre half, I say if Burnley doubled the money at him for like 15 million, it's
you can see why Brentford, a club like Brentford, are interested in O'Shea.
Oh yeah.
But I say Woody mentioned. I mean, I know Rutter's fees written in his contract, isn't he? So that's there. But you look at the sort of Carvalho going to Brentford for an awful lot of money, having not distinguished himself in the Premier League. He's had a decent spell at Hull, but did he pull any trees up at Hull? There seems to be crazy money knocking around, but it's. It's good in a sense that Burnley is starting to dig in the heels and say, no, we're not going to sell. I'm still convinced we could have got more for Dwight McNeil. Still Absolutely. Convinced you could have got more at the time for Nathan Collins, for Nick Pope, and it's good. If you want Sander Berger, it cost Sheffield United sort of thick end of 25 million quid. Burnley got him on a relatively good deal because I think he was coming towards the end of his contract there. But he's, again, 26, Norwegian international, proven at Premier League. If Hamer's worth 15 million quid, Berger's worth more than that, quite simply, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Andy, Odebear's an interesting one, isn't he? Because he strikes me as that kind of player that, yes, somebody might take a punt on 15, 18 million for him or something like that now. But he also looks to me like the kind of player, and I know Vincent Kompany said somewhere in this squad there's £100 million player and all that kind of stuff that we laughed about. But he does look like the kind of player to me that he could have a storming season in the Championship and go up and do very, very well for a season or half a season in the Premier League and then be worth much, much more than that. You could see him perhaps, if he did something like that, being worth 50 million or something like that. So do you cash in now on a player like that, or do you think to yourself, this guy has the potential to be a really, really big asset?
Yeah, I think that's the decision, and it's the good place that Burnley have put themselves in a sense of that. While there was frustration at the types of signings that they made last season, but you buy these types of players for almost 3-4 years down the line in the hopes that you've developed them to a point where you're not just doubling what you bought them for, but you're tripling it or quadrupling it. And Odebear strikes you as that type of player. He showed it in glimpses last season, didn't he? In some games, he was unplayable for periods of, and maybe not for a consistent 90 minutes, but also showed that youth element, that the way it's games where you just didn't really see him. So yeah, it's similar to what I thought with McNeil, and obviously McNeil had more Premier League experience, but there was an element of me which thought if Dwight McNeil comes and is the best player in the Championship, which he should have been for the talent that he's got, and probably would have been under Kompany, he would have gone back up to the Premier League with a value even higher than what what Burnley did get from Everton, which I thought was a decent price. All being said. So it's that gamble. I think there's, you look at sort of an O'Shea and a Berger, you feel like their value is not going to rise much more than what's being sort of quoted in terms of price.
Exactly, but yeah.
For someone like an Estev, for example, who is 21, 22, or an Odebear, if you have that really good season in the Championship, you either go into the Premier League with even more experience and have another really good season there, or that's when the Premier League clubs are really looking at you. Because I think it's with Odeberry, there's still a little bit of a jury out, I think, in terms of Premier League level of if is he worth the value. Say there's a £20 million price tag, for example. Is he worth that, and is he going to give you £20 million worth of quality for a team who, who's going to be mid-table? But then you look at the value of the Carvalho transfer, and yes, he's at Liverpool, and yes, he had a good pre-season, but other than the first couple of months at Liverpool, he's not proven anything in the Premier League. He went to Leipzig and didn't have a good loan there, and was at Hull and scored goals. But I don't, from what you hear, he wasn't sort of this standout player who was sort of, light years ahead of everyone else. So it's difficult, isn't it? But Odeberry he strikes you as that type of player who, and Koleosho's similar, signed for even less. Who, you see them two, in the front line against Luton, and you just think, what Championship defences are going to cope with these for the majority of the games? There's just so few because of the pace, the skill. Koleosho, you sort of, you want to see a little bit more improvement in the goal contributions and the output this season, based on the raw talent that you saw last season. But it looks like Odeberry certainly got that, and if you have those two firing all the way this season, their values are going to increase significantly. And then it's up to you, because ideally you're in a much better place then, aren't you, in the Premier League with the money, from the TV revenues and stuff, where you can ask for even more, because there's no pressure less pressure even, if you like, to sell.
Yeah, Koleosho is going to be interesting what happens with his international future as well, now that the United States are about to appoint Maurizio Pochettino as their manager. It's a bit different for Koleosho getting a phone call from Maurizio Pochettino to getting one from good old Greg Berhalter. So maybe a World Cup coming up in 2026, if Koleosho does really well in the first few months of this season, gets called up by Pochettino, he's in the US national team, those things affect value as well. His value would go up quite a lot if he was a US national team player under Super Poch, as he's now known over here. One player we have had come in this week, we will discuss briefly before we turn our thoughts to Cardiff City. He's Brazilian. He didn't even cost $1 million. He's Ronaldinho's son, and no one knows a great deal about him. Woody, what do we make of this one?
I think it's one of those that's arguably going to get more buzz today than he will get for any other time during his tenure at Burnley. And to be fair, he's had quite a bit. I've seen quite a lot on the Twitters of people going, "Oh, Ronaldinho's lad," assuming that he's going to be a good one. But it's been quite difficult to find anything in relation to what he's done, or, like Chris was saying, he's maybe got a corner in his show reel. So I mean, and Scott Parker said that he's one, obviously, for the development squad. So it sounds like he's here to be prepared for bigger and better things, or not, as the case may be.
João Mendes, he is. Yeah, I mean, Chris, you were on our WhatsApp group. You were suggesting, he might be more of a Jordi Cruyff, or there's been a few others, haven't there, players? I mean, Jordi Cruyff wasn't that bad, but Paul Dalglish.
Jordi a disservice. Yeah, he wasn't
Paul
quite
Dalglish,
his dad, was he?
But
Paul Dalglish was rotten, wasn't he?
I think
Darren Ferguson. Yeah,
Maradona's lad, who he refused to acknowledge as his lad until very later on in life. He had a brief spell at Napoli and didn't really do anything, but it's no guarantee. Obviously, it's a lot of buzz around his parents and everything. But you also pointed out, we've had a bit of a habit of signing these kind of development players who don't develop.
Yeah, you sort of think back, and say Burnley fans will remember all these hatfuls of lads who've come from Manchester United and Arsenal and Everton's and Cities and all. And they go into the development squad, and I'll say off the top of my head, you can think of like Jimmy Dunn, who came from United, who, progressed to a point, and Burnley got a decent fee in the end from QPR, about £1 million or so. Obviously, Dwight McNeil, who arrived from United age 14, and within 3 years he's playing against Olympiacos in the Europa League and, putting together sort of, 3.5 solid seasons in the Premier League and becoming a £20 million sale. But other than that, you've had little snippets here and there. Dan Adji got a taste, but I think last I looked, he was at Crewe or something. Dan Adji, Josh Ginnelli's, people like this, and I don't know. It's a conversation for another time. But to me, like I said, you used to look at the old reserve setup, and if you had a good game in the reserves on a Wednesday night, you were knocking on the door of the first team. But and you were also, you could be a young kid, 17, 18. And you'd be playing at Main Road against Steve McMahon and Niall Quinn and, Dan Petrescu at Sheffield Wednesday and, proper pros and getting a proper grounding. But it's all this sort of, the under-23 football playing, all playing a similar style of football on perfectly manicured pitches. And you do wonder whether, but some players still come through, don't they? You can't, like say your Palmers and your Fodens, and they've got to come through from somewhere. But whether that's via big clubs letting players develop on loan, like your Conor Gallagher's and people like that. But no, for me, the system's. I just thought the reserve system was a better way of doing things, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, isn't it, Andy, for players in development squads, at clubs that have big squads. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason why the loan thing is so essential to player development these days, isn't it? But if you've got a big squad where there are 2 players for every position and you're the 3rd or 4th in the overall sort of depth chart of the club, it's pretty hard to break. You've got to be absolutely outstanding at development level, haven't you?
Yeah, and especially if you think about Burnley, how young the squad is. So if you're buying 21, 22-year-olds who you think are in the senior setup, like what's the hope for the 19, 20-year-olds in the under 21s? It's difficult to find a way through, isn't it? And even in this pre-season, I know obviously we haven't seen a lot of it, and a lot of it's been behind closed doors. But there's not really been, even under Company last year, there was a couple who sort of had, made a little bit of a name for themselves, didn't he? In a couple of the friendlies, but there's not even been like that, anything like that this season. And I think it speaks to the size. It does speak to the size of the squad. But Burnley have sort of had this sort of system going on for quite a while now, where they recruit 5, 6, 7 sort of 19, 20-year-olds to sort of not just make up the numbers, but certainly flesh out the under 21 squad. And I think that is it in the hope that one of them is able to progress to a point where they do create a bit of value and you do get a bit of money back for sort of bringing them in and developing them a little bit. But it's tricky especially when it's a big squad you're trying to break into, and also it's also a squad that's aimed at buying young players for the first team. So they are buying players who are your age, if not younger, for the first team, who've probably got a bit of first team experience already, so it just bumps you down the pecking order. But you think of sort of the Costellos, the Dodgsons, who've had little tastes and obviously have gone out on loan to sort of further the development that way. But they were there at the start of Company's sort of reign, if you like, and were in and around it. And obviously Costello starts the first couple of games by, very quickly they were phased out, and then they go on loan, but there was no sort of sense that they were ever going to get back into the first team fold. And that again, again this season, even like a Michael Mellon, for example, who you feel like has been putting in the work in the lower leagues on loan to maybe, or in Scotland, to maybe get a bit of a sniff, and again it was out on loan again. And is it a case of let's assess next season? But then these players are getting a little bit older each time, and then it comes to a point where you've got a striker who's younger than them, and then what do you do? So yeah, it's really difficult to break through. And I think when you are when they're not players who you've looked after from 12, 13, 14 and really nursed and nurtured up to that point, it makes it even more difficult, because you are just sort of taking gambles essentially and hoping that these players have that breakout year in these 1-2 year contracts that they sign. And and as has been the case for a lot of these players that Burnley have brought in, that hasn't been the case. And then, with the next year they're out the door and the next batch come in, and it's just a bit of a cycle that doesn't necessarily seem to be particularly productive. But it is so difficult. It's difficult to break in at any club, and when your club is designed to buy players for young players for the first team, it makes it even more difficult, I think.
It is. And I know what Chris means, because certainly as a fan, it's a lot harder to follow these kind of players and the development than it used to be. I mean, I remember when I was young going and watching the youth teams on Gawthorpe, and you sort of knew, watching Keith Newton was the first team right back, and you knew that if he was going to be dropped, then Brian Laws from the reserve stroke A team was going to go in at right back, and behind him was Lee Dixon, and you could see that generational change very, very easily. Now you'd have really struggled to say who's the third and fourth choice right backs coming through from the development squad. And over the last decade, it's really become almost impossible to follow this stuff unless you're one of the people who do go out to Gawthorpe and watch those games and follow it really, really closely. It's difficult. Right, we'll get on to Cardiff City. We'll just take a quick break now, and then we'll talk about Saturday's opponents. So, Cardiff City coming to Turf Moor. Woody, they finished 12th last year. They had a pretty solid sort of season for a club that's had a fair bit of, ups and downs and instability. It seemed like a sort of solid season for them. What do you expect from them at Turf Moor on Saturday?
Well, like you say, they were kind of mid-table last year. And that was with Ramsey being injured for quite a long periods within it. And I don't think Callum Robinson featured that much. So I think with them having signed a couple as well, and they looking to at least improve upon that, but it's still going to be a good season for them if they get into the playoffs, isn't it? So they're still going to be, mid-table to at best, maybe playoff contenders. And so arguably at home at the beginning of the season, you're going to expect us to get a result, and a decent result at that.
You agree with that, Chris?
Yeah. I see. We all go back to that. It was a different proposition. It'd be a different feel. But that final game of the championship season, where we just took them to the cleaners, didn't we? It was a party atmosphere and all that. But I say Robinson. I don't know if Robinson's a bit of a doubt again from what I read earlier. Who's on his day, a gifted lad. But I think is it El Ghazi? He's at Cardiff now.
Yeah, from Villa.
I don't believe he's available. So they've got the players. Well, anyone at this level is capable of getting a result anywhere. That's why we love the championship. It's mad, as we saw on the opening. The opening day. You look at Portsmouth, newly promoted, getting a result. Moments away from winning at Leeds, and Oxford winning on the open day, and so on and so forth. But it's just, to me, it's probably going to be one of those. It's going to be a test of where Monday night was, superb counter-attacking football. Can Burnley break down a side that, like I say, without having looked at Cardiff, where you'd expect them to probably come and respect Burnley and bank in really and make life difficult. And Burnley good enough to break down a team that does that.
Yeah, Andy, they've managed to sort of keep the manager Erol Bulut, the German Turkish manager, and they've brought in a few players. Al Ghazi is one of them. Callum Chambers, Chris Willock. They've got Wilfred Kanga, who's on loan from Hertha Berlin up front. So they should be a bit stronger than last season, having built on what they did last year.
Yeah, I think just from sort of having a bit of a read in the last couple of days, it just feel like there's a bit more optimism around what they might be able to achieve. I think obviously playoffs is the dream rather than the expectation, if you like. I don't think it's a squad and a set of fans who expect to be in the top six come the end of the season. But I think there's always that bit of hope. And yeah, I think from looking at it, I think there was a sense that they would have been unlucky on the opening day against Sunderland. it was 2-0 to Sunderland, but by the sounds of it, they played decent in patches. But obviously, you expect Burnley to be a completely different proposition and they're away from home this time. And, they'll be looking to bounce back from what would have been a frustrating start to the season. But you still expect, Burnley to be comfortable. And I think it's going to be just an interesting to see, as Chris sort of alluded to, just what Parker sort of, how he interprets the game this time. I think from what I was told, there was a lot of work going into the game on those sort of balls in behind and seeing that as a weakness, which stands in good stead, because if your manager's identifying something, working on it, and then the players are executing it, that bodes well. So you hope that theme continues, and you'd suspect that, as Cardiff are going to be a little bit deeper and probably try and soak up as much as possible, and that provides a different challenge. But with the attacking options that Burnley have, you suspect that if the four, if you like, that start, or three that start in sort of that front line aren't working, they've got about 7 on the bench to bring on, because that attacking depth on the bench on Monday was pretty impressive. So there's loads of different ways they can go with it. So you just think it's just important to get that first home win. And Championship at the start of the season was one of them where you never quite know, because everyone's sort of sussing out how good they are. A lot of teams are sussing out how good they are, and there can be a bit of a shock here and there. And was it 1-1 with Luton last time? And obviously, at that point you didn't quite know how good Luton were going to be with that first home game under Company. So I think the important thing is just to try and build on the momentum, and even if it's a bit of a naff 1-0, it's just getting those 3 points on the board and just trying to build that early momentum to take into the season. That's the key.
It is, yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it, though, really? I mean, just looking forward to a game and you thought, well, we expect to win, and after everything we went through last season, it's such a role reversal. But looking forward to it. We'll see. It's on live television in the United States as well, I believe, Woody, isn't it? On Paramount Plus, so we can watch it with ease.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about it all in the debrief on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone, for listening in. Thanks to Andy and Chris and Woody for joining us to go through this, and up the Clarets.